What's the best way to watch a fishing tournament? Well, just watch the live stream. What's going on, YouTube? Today we're going to be doing an updated PvP tier list for Update 44 with it right around the corner in its new ranked competitive battlegrounds 4v4. It's a great time to break down what classes are good for PvP, what tools do they have, and what are they good at. Now, they won't just be graded on battlegrounds, they'll also be graded on things such as Cyrodiil, the Imperial City, and how good they are in 1v1 fights, just in case you're really into dueling. We're also going to mention if they're very reliant on things such as guild lines, like do you need to have things such as the Psijic Order, for example, because that could be a pretty big drawback if you don't have access to that chapter. Same if they're really reliant on scribing skills. Just that way, if you know, hey, this may be an A tier class, but it is very reliant on these things. I'm not going to factor how reliant they are on DLC content into the ratings, because that just might make it a little bit too convoluted. But I will mention it just in case you only have access to certain things. That way, if you want to get started with something, you can just jump right into it and be successful with it. And another just quick housekeeping item, these are all going to be based on their magicka and stamina components, because with hybridization, oftentimes we're flip-flopping between them, and most of the time we're using both stamina and magicka-based abilities, so there's really no point in ranking them separately. It may come up during the video for specific classes where magicka and stamina might be very different, but at the end of the day, regardless of what race you are, you can pretty seamlessly just flip-flop between what's the most effective build for you in that moment, regardless of if it's more magicka or stamina-based, based on nerfs, changes, scribing skills, etc. And as always, we do very quick YouTube intros, so hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. I try to get at least a 5% like-to-view ratio on the video. Let's jump into it. I do also want to mention we are doing our traditional tier list here, but do not be surprised if you don't see a whole lot of F tier classes. ESO is not like other MMOs where they have 15, 20 classes, looking at you BDO, where there genuinely are some absolutely horrible classes that even if you were the best with them, you would still get absolutely ham-fisted by the worst player of a different class. So don't expect to see a whole lot of bad classes. S tier is going to be reserved for classes that are pretty much universally good at all of those types of content, whether it's dueling, battlegrounds, Cyrodiil, Imperial City. A class ones are very good classes that are just seeing a bit of a drawback somewhere. B tier classes definitely are good at most things, but definitely do see a drawback in a specific type of content. C tier is they may be really good at something and then horrible at something else, or they may just be lukewarm good at everything. And then F tier is if you use this class, you're probably going to get clowned on. And even if you are the best of this player, you're not going to do very well. And to start us off, we have the Sorcerer. Easy S tier. I think that very few people will disagree with this placement. When it comes to dueling, battlegrounds, Cyrodiil, Imp City, most people would put the Sorcerer in the top two for the best for those things. When it comes to 1v1ing, there's so many good sets that you can use to build a really good Sorcerer for dueling. If you want to take this to Battlegrounds, the ability to have good spammables, executes, mobility, shields make Sorcerer really good for that type of content. Same for Cyrodiil, where mobility is even more important. And Imperial City, where I think that actually mobility is the most important thing. Anytime I've taken some of my friends into the Imperial City, or I've talked to you guys about the Imperial City, I noticed a couple things. And oftentimes, people will get what I call caught by a group larger than the one that they're currently in, and they have no real way to escape it. They don't have any access to any sort of 1vxing or any ability to kind of get themselves out of dangerous situations, whether it's with escape, pots, whether it's with things like Blood Mist, whether it's, with Stage 4 Sneak, whether it's any sort of blinks, teleports. And the Sorcerer has access to pretty much all of those things that I've listed. And obviously, the Sorcerer is probably in the top two best for single target damage on an opponent, and they could do it from a massive distance, and their executes are unmatched. And the best part about a Sorcerer, and why I can recommend it, even if, it wouldn't be in the S tier, is that it doesn't really rely on scribing skills, and it doesn't rely on a lot of DLC skills either. Meaning that if you don't have access to ESO+, you can still make a very competitive Sorcerer for very cheap. In its PTS patch notes, the biggest change that it's going to see is a reduction to Conjured Ward, but I don't think that it's necessarily going to be enough because sorcerers can stack so much max health or magicka that I don't think this 5% reduction is going to knock it off its perch. And pretty much every other change that you see is pretty much just an issue. So there's really no other major changes than besides the regenerative ward morph. And next up, we have the controversial decision of do we put Nightblades in A or B tier? I'm going to actually land on A tier. Now, Nightblades are seeing a significant change in PTS on how their stealth works, going from an activation basically to a toggle, meaning that instead of just having a cost for stealth, you actually have to toggle it and then remain toggled using resources to maintain your stealth, right? That's the big change. Normally, Nightblades are an A tier or an S tier class, with only really the main downside being that sometimes in 1v1s they're not the greatest. Sometimes in battlegrounds, their objective play can be a bit more difficult, especially because oftentimes Nightblades rely on things like sets like Vicious Death or bombing to get, crazy kills. They also benefit from stealth, being able to go invisible. If you've ever fought a, two-hander, Nightblade, where they'll go, dizzying swing you, go back into stealth, come back out of stealth, it can be very tricky. And I think that oftentimes the biggest gameplay that's going to be nerfed from that is not necessarily the bombing. You're going to see a reduction in people's ability to go in and out of stealth right in front of you, especially for the more two-hander, melee-focused. Nightblades is going to see the most significant change. But when it comes to Cyrodiil and when it comes to the Imperial City, Nightblades are still going to be fantastic. Vicious Death is still going to be essential for group play. Bombing is still going to be essential for group play. And inside of the Imperial City, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better class because Imperial City is very focused on killing both players and NPCs and getting, in and around, not getting caught by big groups, being able to pick off players. And what better class than Nightblades? And that's why Nightblades are primarily focused inside the Imperial City. That's where you'll oftentimes run into them, especially because a lot of guides will also recommend players be werewolves as well inside of the Imperial City. And nobody likes to encounter a werewolf more than a Nightblade. And here it is in the PTS, the tragic day for all Nightblade PvP enjoyers. Shadow Cloak are now a toggled ability. Rather than a duration-based effect, while the ability is active, you will drain 3,240 magicka every 2 seconds, and notably disable your magicka recovery, rather than costing 4,590 magicka and persisting 3 seconds. There are some big changes from this. It's actually technically cheaper to maintain your stealth by a very small margin here. But overall, I think that this is going to be seen as a pretty big nerf. You do get an increase to damage against monsters, so maybe players that are inside the Imperial City will love that. But overall, this is going to be probably a net negative. But I don't think it's a net negative to the point where it would drop them to the B tier. I think that if you are potentially a PvE Nightblade, and that's obviously relevant to this video, except maybe some niche utilization in the Imperial City farming, you're not too happy about these Shadow Cloak changes. But overall, I still think it's a very good class for what it wants to do. And I think that it's such a unique style of gameplay that's always going to be essential just because of how popular it is, especially with things like bombing, single target damage, and sniping, which is still going to be a very popular way to play. It just might not be as popular in things like 4v4 battlegrounds. I definitely think, though, 8v8 battlegrounds, Nightblades, you'll see a significant more portion of them because they're not going to have to be as objective and focused. Next up, I want to tackle the big boy, and that is the Dragon Knight. Now, the Dragon Knight, to me, is also going to go in A tier. Now, Dragon Knight is probably one of the most versatile classes to use, whether you want to duel somebody, utilize it in a battleground, Cyrodiil. I think really where it loses the most points for me is inside the Imperial City, and even sometimes in open world combat, you might find that Dragon Knights are pretty restricted in what they want to do. Because if they want to use things like Elusive Mist or anything that can give them any sort of speed up, it's going to waste one of their skill slots, and being one of the most versatile classes, they don't like to do that. And if they do go that route of having a little more mobility, then they're forced to be a vampire, which has seen significant nerfs. Being a vampire used to just be an auto-include for most classes for PvP, but with the change to the undeath passive, you don't see it as much. So to me, if you want a really good 1v1 and 1vx style class, I think Dragon Knight is probably one of the easiest ones that you can build. And I always joke that the developers play Dragon Knights because, well, they do, and it rarely ever drops between S and A tier ever, in my opinion, for PvP. And notably, the Dragon Knights are not seeing any major changes in Update 44 that's going to either take them above or below where they used to be. So for me, I think that it's a pretty solid inclusion into the A tier, but I definitely think that there will be people advocating in the comments below for them to be higher into the S tier. The other nice thing too is that while they can use scribing skills, they certainly aren't tethered to them and they do not, require them to be used. They're not an auto include just based on how versatile the skills and things are that Dragon Knights like to use. In fact, the only change that they're getting is to Ardent Flame Inferno, where Carterize, this morph, now heals up to 4 nearby allies every 3 seconds, then healing 1 nearby ally every 5 seconds, reducing the healing per tick, but resulting in an 11% increase per second with the new faster tick rate. So really no major changes in the PTS for the Dragon Knight. Next up, we're going to tackle one of the most recommended classes in the game for new players, and that is Templar. Now, Templar is in a really interesting spot because I think Templars are some of the best classes for what they want to do, but they really do suffer in some other areas. For example, I think for Battlegrounds, Templars are going to be fantastic. Their survivability and ability to kind of keep themselves alive while healing high DPS is going to be fantastic when you're in some group-based gameplay like Battlegrounds or even in 1v1 type content. But when it comes to Cyrodiil, where oftentimes, the flow of battle will have lots of mobility, lots of changes in the amount of pressure on the front lines, you're oftentimes going to find yourself on the front, and you may have the problem where all my friends are dead syndrome occurs, where you sometimes rely on other people to kill enemies around you, and you can become overwhelmed more than other classes can. When it comes to Imperial City, similar types of problems where you used to be able to utilize things like teleports, being a vampire, but now being a vampire is not an auto-include for the Undeath perk, meaning that the mobility loss and an inability to kind of maintain that 1vx type pressure could be very difficult for you in that open world content. But if you're just looking at this from a Battlegrounds perspective, I think that they would rise to the A or the S tier. But because this is a generalized PvP tier list, they definitely fall a little bit below. They don't have auto-include abilities that are scribing, but they do also benefit greatly from some scribing skills, so kind of take that how you will. The nice thing I will say about them as a class is that they rely on a lot of really good, easy-to-get crafted sets. I would say that for the majority of classes, but definitely Templars benefit, I would say, the most from that, because oftentimes you'll see things like Sorcerers auto-include, Death Dealer's Feat. You'll see other classes like Dragon Knights and Wardens auto-include the Saint and the Seducer Mythic. You can sometimes get away with not running any sort of Mythic and just run some really easy to get, crafted sets like Mechanical Accruity. And their PTS changes are going to continually help them in their frontline survivability combat with changes to Sun Shield, which you guys can see here, and now morphs to apply Minor Maim to all enemies in the area, which is just overall going to be helpful. The biggest reason that I have the Templars in B tier versus A tier is if you go to Cyrodiil or the Imperial City right now, you are not going to see very many Templars. But I do again think, just to reiterate, when it comes to Battlegrounds, this is probably an S or an A tier class, because they're going to be constantly close to their allies. They have such high survivability, and they also have the ability to buff and give different things to their teammates and debuff other people around them. So just keep that in mind as we go through with the rest of the tier list. Next up, we have one of the hardest ones to rate also, because it's getting nerfed on PTS for some of its PvP potential, but it's also still really good in all 4 major types of PvP combat. So for that reason, I'm going to put it into the S tier. I think that the amount of things that you can do with Cruxes, the amount of things that you can do with scribing to kind of continually utilize and get other buffs and things that you wouldn't have access to in other classes. The Arcanist is very high skill level, but it also has very high skill output. And what I mean by that is you can tweak so many things with scribing, with your cruxes, with how you want to build an Arcanist that you can be so versatile in the types of content that you do. And I definitely think that there is a lot of reward for that. If you go to Cyrodiil, you'll see a healthy handful of Arcanists, not nearly as prevalent as they used to be, and they are seeing a slight reduction with PTS notes. But when it comes to what they can do and how buildable and customizable they are, it's hard to argue that they can't do any of the four major types of content if you just tweak them accordingly. And for that reason, I am going to put them into the S tier. I would probably put them between the S and the A tier if there was like a way to like put them like halfway in between. But overall, I think I'm pretty happy with putting them in the S tier. Just because I do think that they tick all of the boxes in my criteria. And some notable changes to them on PTS. Again, these are obviously still on PTS. Runespite Ward, they want to feel more like a parry, so they reduce the size of this morph shield after 1 second of that window by 56%, which is interesting. It's kind of a unique change. I've not seen any of the other classes like that before. And you can see that they said that they actually want it to feel more like a parry, which is kind of interesting. And then Runic Defense, reduce the healing granted by this morph by 50%, increase the armor granted to 3,300 up from 3,000, increase the duration of the armor and crowd control immunity granted to 7 seconds, fix an issue where the crowd control immunity failed to apply it until after the armor effect ended. So they're toning down the effectiveness of this morph upgrade into more of a conversion morph, since the crowd effect community adds tremendous potential in PvP, which it does. And we're gently bumping up the armor density, so the trade-off of the healing is a bit, not as harsh. I still think this is going to be pretty good, and this just goes to show that even the things that are being, nerfed still have potential to be good in other ways, especially now because it's not broken, where it's not giving you the crowd control immunity until after the armor, because that was obviously pretty detrimental to its use. Next up, you guys are going to be happy with this. All of the Warden lovers up there are an A tier class. Now, Wardens notoriously have always felt like they're missing something, right? They always are pretty good, but they're always lacking in certain departments. But with the addition of scribing and the tweaks on PTS, the Warden damage output and toolkit just continues to be expanded upon. And now I think that they're seeing a lot of burst potential and the ability to kind of weave in some scribing skills to miss some of the buffs and things that they wouldn't have. They definitely, in my opinion, are a class that requires DLC lines and scribing most notably. But I do think that they have the A tier potential. I think that regardless of the type of content that you're doing, you're going to be very satisfied now with using a Warden. And I'm glad to say that because I know a lot of you guys love the Warden class, especially those of you who are subscribed to me because you've been advocating so strongly for the Warden. So I think that overall, you'll be very happy to see that Wardens are an A tier class, especially when it comes to playing objective type combat. Wardens are going to be very good because they're pretty bulky. They do really good access to burst damage. They can do very good AoE damage that can be very annoying on point-based objectives. And I think that you're going to see some good success with them. And no real notable nerfs or buffs to kind of boast on PTS. Obviously, again, this could change, but I think that if you are looking for a good class right now that I think is only going to see its stock increase, Wardens are a really good option to do so, especially with how mobile they are in these arenas such as Battlegrounds. They're probably going to be pretty popular to see once the game mode actually finally comes out. And finally, one of the most controversial picks again, but I still think that if you are a Necromancer enjoyer, you won't be mad at me for this, but I think that Necromancers are a C tier class. However, the Necromancer's AoE burst in damage is going to make them, in my opinion, pretty fantastic for Battlegrounds. I think that you're going to see a lot of competitive Battlegrounds play with Necromancers, especially the objective-based ones. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that they're still a bit woeful for other types of content. For example, if you were to take a Necromancer into the Imperial City, not going to be the funnest time for you. If you're dueling with a Necromancer, probably not going to be the funnest time for you. You could still duel and still go to the Imperial City and do fairly well with them. However, it's a very high skill bar, and if you had that same skill bar in any other class, you would be probably leaps and bounds ahead of other players because their skill cap is much lower than other classes. So When it comes to the Necromancer, I think that you'll be happy with the changes because I think for point-based objectives, Necromancers are in the top 3 best ones. I think when it comes to Battlegrounds, easy top 3 with their ability to do AoE, damage, survivability. They're going to be very annoying on flags. They're going to be really annoying on relic defenses. They're going to be able to cut off lanes inside of competitive Battlegrounds. They can push, enemies into certain areas. That's going to be fantastic. That does not take away from the fact that if you're dueling a Necromancer, you probably will be able to easily decimate them with most of the other classes, even with their high survivability. Or if they are built so survivable, then they're not going to really be able to do a whole lot of damage output to you. But in places like Battlegrounds, you don't always need to be focused on dealing a lot of 1v1 type damage, and that's where I think that the Necromancer still shines, except now with more competitive-based objective play, they finally see a reason to be included into the PvP discussion, where oftentimes, because Battlegrounds is kind of a forethought, and a lot of people just focus on Cyrodiil, and maybe some people focus on Imperial City, they've always been kind of woeful at those two activities. They still do see some utilization in open world combat, especially when there's definitely more of a constrained type area. They can also be really good at bombers. They also make really good PvP tanks. And I definitely think that they're still going to see that utilization. It doesn't take them out of the S tier, but they are as good as they've ever been for PvP, in my opinion. And I think that you're going to see a lot of success with them inside of Battlegrounds. You just probably won't see that success kind of transition to other type areas. And you guys can see that there was a big update to Grave Grasp, which Ghostly Embrace is going to be the main recipient of this. And this morph now deals frost damage rather than magic damage. While it no longer applies minor maim on each hit, it now applies new effects instead. And the first one will give you the chilled effect. The second one applies a frost damage over time effect, similar to Burning Talons, but now frosty based. And the final one generates a corpse rather than stunning the enemy, which is pretty big because it gives you a lot of ability to generate some corpses in an area, which can just overall be very beneficial. The developers go into this a bit too, where they think that it's going to be a good change for the Necromancer. I definitely agree. And there's also some changes inside of Gravelord, Sacrificial Bones. Fix an issue where the corpse left behind. This ability in its morph could sometimes cause corpse consuming visual effects to not appear in some cases. And then Gravelord Sacrifice fixed an issue where this morph's area of effect and damage and corpse generation added to the third cast of the Flame Skull, and its morph would fail if the initial target died from the cast. So some minor tweaks and changes, but the main one being up here to Ghostly Embrace, which I think is going to see, again, some really good Battlegrounds utilization because of its ability to deal area of effect damage, and I think that that's really what they're going to be used for. So I hope that people are not too upset with them being in the C tier, because I do think that they're still very competitive. So I hope that this list wasn't too controversial. I think everybody should hopefully be pretty happy. Obviously, again, this is all subjective, but you're more than welcome to flame me in the comments because it does push the algorithm. So I will take any sort of flaming in the comments below. But again, I think that most of everybody should be happy because at the end of the day, there are really no bad classes. There are classes that aren't necessarily good at certain things. But if you're a Necromancer right now, I would still be very excited to take it into Battlegrounds. If you're a Templar player, take it into 4v4, 8v8 Battlegrounds. The things that you might not be good at, you probably may not be even interested in doing in the first place. For example, I rarely find myself dueling somebody, so if something's good at dueling, or in the Imperial City, well, I don't spend a lot of time there. I'm more focused on Battlegrounds and Cyrodiil. So it can be very different based on what perspective you want to have in a class and how good it is at certain things. So again, this tier list is general across all PvP content. So I hope that this was helpful. Hope it got those brain juices a-flowing and kind of let you know, hey, my classes that I currently have, because a lot of you have access to different classes. Maybe I want to try this one for update 44 and get it ready. And if you want, check out my ESO meta report to find out what are the best sets in the game currently for PvP. You slap on any of those bad boys and you'll probably be happier than a dragon that has entered elsewhere. But as always, thank you guys so much again for watching. We're doing our 3 giveaway drawings. All you have to do to enter is leave a comment in the comments below. I'm sure there will be tons of comments on this video. And obviously, if you guys give really good opinions, I will pin your comment because I do love when people outline their opinions as well. So feel free, and if you have a really good opinion I will pin it. I can only pin one comment though. Second thing is just be subscribed/follow on Twitch and Twitter. And the third thing is look for a hidden word to be flashed upon the screen. If you're the first person to comment that word, you will win. Thank you guys so much again for watching, and I'll catch you later. Bye, guys.
You better remember to like and subscribe to Jakeclips. Or you should. I might have to pluck your eyes if you don't. Or, better yet, I'll skip rope with your entrails. Do it now. Subscribe. Ta-ta. Off with you.